Presidente, Señorías.
President, honourable members, Commissioner, Madam Commissioner. I would like to begin by expressing my sadness for the latest disaster off the Greek coast and the unnecessary loss of human life that we see all too often in the Mediterranean Sea. This is an unsustainable situation that is unacceptable, and it is an absolute priority for the European Union to prevent these deaths alongside its Mediterranean partners. Let me first turn to the issue of search and rescue. Saving lives is not optional. We have a duty to help vessels and people who are in distress at sea, to do this in the Coordination Centre for Maritime Rescue. And this is governed by international instruments on maritime law, and frontline bodies are working on a daily basis to implement these instruments. However, although the search and rescue isn't under EU competence, the European Union must play a key role. Our front line for action should always be the prevention of the perilous journeys across the Mediterranean Sea. The more people who do not begin this perilous journey, the fewer lives will be lost. And it's with this objective, and in line with our general objective for migration, that I wish to stress the Council's commitment to the fight against trafficking gangs and smugglers, and its intention to dismantle the business model. These people are using the lives of migrants in order to obtain profit. Now, let me turn to the work that we have been doing together with third countries, both countries of origin and transit countries, in line with the action lines set out in the Extraordinary Council of February. Initiatives have been launched at the highest possible level with major partners such as Bangladesh, Iraq, Pakistan and Tunisia, and we provide support. And we also cooperate with many partners in the Mediterranean to improve capacity and management of borders and asylum, especially when it comes to search and rescue operations. And this work will continue and will be intensified as and when it is possible. I have so far focused on the operational aspects of migration, but let me also mention just how much progress has been made when it comes to the Migration and Asylum Pact, which will improve the efficiency of our procedures at Europe's external borders. I can assure you that the Spanish presidency will pick up the work of previous presidencies, which I am grateful for, to ensure that Council, together with Parliament, can reach an agreement on these very important legislative proposals. Amongst them, the regulation on crisis situations. Alongside the pact, we will continue our commitment to building up the EU rules on return and establishing safe and legal routes to the European Union. Finally, allow me to mention the reactivation of the contact group on search and rescue of the European Commission, which is seeking new forms of cooperation in the field, particularly when it comes to the exchange of information amongst member states and improving the mapping of the search and rescue situations in the Mediterranean. Honourable members, let me conclude by saying that the European Union needs an overarching holistic migration policy that it can support those who need support and avoid migrants losing their lives. We have a number of lines of action for this work, and bringing all of these actions together will yield the results that we all desire. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Navarro Rios. And now, on behalf of the Commission, Commissioner Johansson.
Thank you, President. Honourable members, Secretary of State Navarro Rios, The Adriana sank on 14th of June. The loss, as many as 600 souls, making this one the worst shipwreck, not just in the Mediterranean, not just of migrant vessels, but one of the worst shipwrecks this century worldwide. We must honor the dead, help the survivors, establish the facts. What appears to have happened, the smugglers brought their victims to the trawler that was to be their tomb, packed them like sardines, like cattle, like cargo, possibly 750 people, women and children down below. The boat drifting, rocking, we can imagine the panic spreading. In the dead of the night, the Adriana suddenly turned over and sank, 4 kilometers down into the abyss, dragging all within down with her. None of the women and children survived. I immediately contacted Frontex Executive Director Hans Leitens. I also spoke with the Greek caretaker government and the head of the Hellenic Coast Guard, and with the newly appointed Greek ministers last week. Our agencies intervened also immediately. Frontex by air identified the vessel at the scene. The Frontex Executive Director was on the ground in Greece the next day to support. Frontex also launched a serious incident report. The EU Asylum Agency helped survivors in Malakasa. Just over 100 people were saved from the sea after the Adriana capsized. There are many unanswered questions here. Now we need to establish exactly what happened, every step of this fatal journey, why the Adriana sank. The Greek General Prosecutor launched an investigation. The prosecutor investigated smuggling, and the naval court the Greek Coast Guard's response. These investigations need to bring trust and confidence that the facts can be established, including the smuggling route followed. We know that the practice of irregular departures from eastern Libya have increased by 600% this year. Libya remains a very complicated situation, as again shown recently. And let me make clear, Coast Guards have to carry out their responsibilities in full respect of international law. This means any demonstrations of violence is unacceptable. Let us remember our fundamental principle. Our first duty is to save lives. This is what Coast Guards in countries of first entry are doing on a daily basis. The EU does everything in its power to support member states on search and rescue. This year alone, Frontex helped to save 20,000 lives. The Commission relaunched the Search and Rescue Contact Group and pushes member states to make progress, working towards a common framework on search and rescue. And in the pact, we have proposed special solidarity measures for search and rescue. Any serious attempt to saving lives has to also include developing legal pathways and information campaigns along irregular routes to alert people of deadly dangers. We are supporting such campaigns in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Niger, in Senegal, in Mauritania, in the Gambia. But we also need to fight the smugglers who sold people tickets not to Europe but to their deaths. Last week, Europol announced the dismantling by Spain of a smuggling gang which spanned 9 countries. We have set up operational anti-smuggling partnerships with Niger, with Morocco, with Tunisia. I welcome Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif's order to crack down the smugglers right after the disaster. And we are working with Senegal on the Atlantic route, a route that again this week revealed how deadly it is. Last month, we proposed a toolbox to address misuse of commercial transport for irregular migration. We must change smuggling from a low-risk, high-profit crime into a high-risk, low-profit crime. And we need EU laws fit for purpose. I've already issued guidance on non-criminalisation of genuine humanitarian assistance, and now the Commission is also assessing the facilitators package, which is over 20 years old. Last Tuesday, I was in Lampedusa with the Italian Minister Piantedosi. 4,000 people had arrived over the weekend. The majority immediately transferred, only 500 were left. The facilities were dignified and respectful. I met a young man from Chad, a young woman from Ivory Coast. They were so full of energy, of plans and ambition. They were already learning Italian. Our economies need young people like these. They told me they had walked 2 months through the desert before paying the smugglers taking the boat from Tunisia. This is not the way to come to Europe. We need to continue to work on legal pathways. We will implement talent partnership for labour migration, and in October I will propose an EU talent pool to match talent with employers. I have also asked Member States to pledge generously on the resettlement for refugees. Only with a comprehensive approach, preventing irregular departures, fighting smugglers, improving legal pathways, working in close partnership with countries of origin and transit, can we manage migration safely and effectively. And of course, we need then an agreement on the pact. We are making good progress, and I welcome the message from the Spanish Minister of State on the good progress that the Spanish Presidency is now doing. I call on you all to seize the opportunity to reach an agreement within this mandate. Above the Adriana, the waters are now silent. No tombstone, no marker, nothing to remember the names. Let our action be our monument. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Now, on behalf of the group of the European People's Party, colleague Mr. Mandl, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues. Right now, we're dealing with a tragedy of an enormous circumference. It's almost every day there are new deaths in the Mediterranean. We have to see what are the causes of this. The causes are on a chain of tragedies. And this chain begins with disinformation, so that people in the countries of origin receive false information as to how they could travel to Europe and then what they could expect in the EU. Who is spreading this disinformation? It's organized crime who do smugglers. And this is one of the worst form of organized crime of our times. And we also know that there are state actors throughout the world involved, and they do this to put pressure on the European Union. And those who suffer are those who travel. They invest their money in these smugglers. They take a dangerous path, and many die. And that is the tragedy. Those who survive end up on the external borders of the EU, and then they have an asylum application. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, that more than 80% who start that asylum procedure don't enjoy the right to asylum. So they lose time, those who don't lose their lives. Sometimes years, they lose years of their lives. And that's why I think we have to fight disinformation. That's why we have to have asylum procedures sped up, why we have to strengthen the protection of external borders, and we have to make it clear to the people in the countries of origin. We have to explain to people what are their genuine opportunities in Europe and how dangerous the travel is. We have to have a broad approach to fighting organized crime. They endanger human lives, and I think this is all taken into account in this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, colleague Madame Zippel, the floor is yours.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you. For years now, we've been discussing a European migration and asylum policy and the many aspects linked to this. Yet today, in our debate, we're discussing just one thing: saving humans from drowning. And it's not a political decision, it's a humanitarian and legal obligation. I don't know how many times we and others in this House have been discussing these issues, and how many times more we will have to rerun this discussion. We will not give up until the Council, the Member States and the Commission can finally, at long last, take the urgent approach that this challenge really deserves. The challenge and task is not all that complicated. Ensure that we can have coordinated European maritime rescue missions with support from Frontex. Take Mare Nostrum as inspiration for this. Yet, sadly, the thought that we have to save human lives has not made it into the conclusions of the Council. Again and again, we keep hearing reports of how member states have been turning a blind eye, have been withholding support, denying support, and when civil society has been criminalized or prevented from trying to save lives. Stand up and to your humanitarian obligations and responsibilities. This would be a very sound basis for further discussions. Thank you.
Very much. On behalf of Renew Europe Group, colleague Madame Keller, s'il vous plaît.
Madame la Commissaire, chère Ilva.
Commissioner, Mrs. Johansson, Minister for European Affairs, Pascual Navarro Rios. Rescue at sea is first and foremost a humanitarian duty. It's not a variation for certain numbers of thousands of migrants. Our colleagues on the extreme right can't decide on the fate of families and children using their disgusting slogans. And wars at sea are not a solution to migratory management. In the face of distress at sea, our common values, our European history, calls for a single line of conduct, as you yourself recalled, Madam Commissioner, and that is to save human lives. There should be no debate on this, but 25,000 people have died or have disappeared since 2014 in the Mediterranean. The tragic shipwreck of a migrant boat carrying 750 people off the Greek coasts in the middle of June shocked all of us. With my group, Renew Europe, or my colleagues, I also call for the creation of a European search and rescue mission together with member states and with Frontex, cooperating with all the players involved. This mission, as you yourself said, once again, Madam Commissioner, must go hand in hand with a determined struggle against the smugglers and human traffickers. Let's stop this disgusting traffic at source, including in third countries. Let's take stringent measures to dismantle these criminal networks. Colleagues, it is urgent that we act. Thank you.
Merci. On behalf of the group of the Greens European Free Alliance, colleague Mr. Marquardt, the floor is yours.
Ja, vielen Dank, Frau Präsidentin. Ich weiß nicht, wie es den anderen geht, aber mir persönlich...
President, thank you. I don't know how others feel about this, but I find it very difficult to have these debates again and again, and I draft a speech and knowing full well that this kind of thing will happen again and the situation will not improve. I find it very, very difficult to have to say, yes, people must be saved, lives must be saved, NGOs shouldn't be criminalized, we must investigate disasters, and we have the disaster in Pylos, and there's not a common effort to rescue people. There's no common effort to even deal with the bodies that have been recovered from the shipwreck. Well, what happened? An overcrowded vessel. The whole thing was very dangerous. There was a clear indication of distress. Frontex was informed, Greece was informed, and Greece didn't organize a rescue mission. Greece didn't send rescue vessels and didn't even ask Frontex to watch the vessel because there was no wish for the vessel to be watched. Why? We heard this 13 hours after of waiting. We sent special units to try and tow the vessel into Italian waters. And when the vessel was being towed, the vessel capsized, it started sinking. And when it started sinking, there wasn't an immediate effort to actually save lives. It took a long time for that to begin and for some survivors to be taken. And these survivors were taken to closed facilities, no contact with journalists. Their phones were being confiscated so that all evidence could be taken away. And this is not a disaster. It's not an accident. It's a criminal act. And we need to clear up the circumstances around this act. Human lives may be dignified, but if that is a clear yes to that human dignity, then we need to show what human dignity in fact means in Europe. We should show that we can act. We should show, and the European Commission must contribute to ensure that they can support search and rescue organisations if indeed search and rescue is as important as people keep on saying it is.
Very much on behalf of the European Conservatives and Reformers Group, Mrs. Kanko, the floor is yours.
Mevrouw de commissaris, meneer de minister.
Madam Commissioner, Minister, unfortunately, people will continue to die trying to reach Europe. And that's because that's how our asylum system works right now. Reaching the European mainland is the necessary condition to obtain asylum. And that's where the mistake lies. Every dead person in the Mediterranean is a victim of this system. When are we going to realize this doesn't work? Citizens have said that for a while, and now they want decisive action. And I think we have to say that plainly, but that's the problem. Anyone who has a different opinion about asylum or migration is demonized, even canceled. There are all kinds of taboos, especially from the left wing. And at the same time, extreme parties continue to grow, and they reap what Europe sows. What shocks me is that we have the power to do so much, but we don't dare. What we should do is, however, quite obvious. We have to stop rewarding these life-threatening trips. You can't give them the prospect of the right of residence. I think we'd have a more humane system if we were braver.
For the Identity and Democracy Group, Mrs. Tardino, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, just 3 weeks ago, I was in Lampedusa on a mission with the Libe Committee, and all the colleagues there talked about the work, self-sacrifice of a population that over these years has given assistance and hospitality, offering those who have arrived the best face of Europe, as at our recent meeting, the mayor, Mr. Manino, recalled. But talk counts for little. It's very easy to sit here and talk for those who are not in the front line, and for those who, like the NGOs, are very happy to work with the ports of others and to show hospitality and work together with those who determine deaths at sea. We'll never get tired of saying it. The only solution is to act on the external dimension, strengthening cooperation with third countries to stop departures. And we hope that Brussels is finally starting to understand, thanks to the Italian government. We hope so. And so we're going to work hard for a centre-right majority to finally shake off ideologies, switch to common sense, and solve problems for European citizens rather than creating them. Matteo Salvini is on trial for defending European borders, blocking departures and reducing deaths in the Mediterranean. The League is continuing this battle to save lives and guarantee safety, fighting against the business of traffickers. That's always been our priority, and it continues to be so.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Left Group in the European Parliament, Mrs. Ernst.
Weil ihre Rettung eben
Well, since rescue isn't a priority in EU, we've got 10 people dying every day in the Mediterranean. Every 10 days you have a vessel accident involving vessel with deaths. 27,633 people have lost their lives, women with infants, minors. Look, Madam Commissioner, crocodile tears are not going to actually solve the problem. We need action. We need infringement proceedings against Greece and its Coast Guard, which is driving people to their deaths. We need consequences for Poland and Lithuania that have legalized pushbacks. We need clear language directed at Meloni that is standing in the way of rescue at sea and criminalizing it. Commission and Council prefer to trust the Libyan Coast Guard, the so-called Coast Guard of Libya, which just throws people into jail and systematically subject women to rape rather than trust an NGO that saves lives on a daily basis. That's the fact. We need, instead of setting up a European maritime rescue mission, you simply do nothing along with far-right populists who prefer to drive people to their deaths. We must see a return of the rule of law, and the lives of every individual human being must be protected.
Colleagues, may I also remind you that we have to finish on time. We have important votes ahead of us, so I would like to kindly ask you to respect the time that is allocated to your intervention. So we follow with colleague Mr. Papadakis. The floor is yours. And can I ask colleagues to take the seats? Thank you. I'm sorry, we continue with the debate and the floor. I'm sorry, I would please respect the rules of the chamber, and I ask Mr. Papadakis, please.
The Greek government and Frontex have still not come up with answers about the criminal shipwreck of Pylos, with hundreds of victims on a boat that had been under surveillance for at least 16 hours without the alarm being raised in a search and rescue area of Greece. This is an ongoing crime with the signature of the EU and Greek governments, a policy of repression, deportations, repatriations. There's unanimity in the Council on further repression, displacement of people to third countries, and the bargaining with compensations of 20,000 per head. And there's disagreement on the sharing of repression and competition, and when to open the gates to cheap labour. Investigation and truth is what we need here about the criminal shipwreck in Pylos. We need to strengthen the common struggle of peoples and refugees against unacceptable decisions of EU governments that ignore the Geneva Convention, asylum committees in Turkey under the responsibility of the UN and the EU to take applicants to their final destination countries.
Dear President, Presidencia, Commissioner. Os valores fundamentais da democracia.
Fundamental values of European democracy require that we must help those who require help and assistance. That is the basic principle of human dignity. But placing human dignity at the very top of our policies and migration policy doesn't mean that we just have political attacks at the aftermath of a tragedy. It's not enough for the situation to be visible. In the Mediterranean Sea, what we're seeing there is more than just calling out disasters. We need a strategy that will truly prevent and avoid these events from taking place. We need more support to frontline countries which are saving lives on a daily basis. Operational support so to make sure that search and rescue missions can be efficient together with Frontex. We need to break down trafficking networks which are taking advantage of human weaknesses and vulnerabilities. We need to break down and dismantle these networks and inform people about the true risks that they are taking. We need to go further. We need to guarantee that when it comes to asylum claims, they are processed in due time, and that those who do have a right to stay are welcomed and integrated, so that in spite of their safety, relative safety, they are living into conditions that are incompatible with the principles of human dignity. Thank you.
Next speaker, colleague Señor Ruiz de Vesa, por favor.
Muchas gracias, querida presidenta.
Thank you, President, and thank you to Commissioner Johansson for taking part in this important debate. The tragedy of the Adriana in Pylos, I think, unfortunately, has been the chronicle of a death announced. And I think that there are serious political and criminal responsibilities that need to be addressed in this case. But first and foremost, what we have to get from this debate and this resolution is that what happened in Pylos never happens again in the Mediterranean. And for that, I would like to thank my colleagues from other groups, Lucas Mandel from the EPP, Fabienne Keller from Renew, Eric Marquardt as well from the Greens, and Cornelia Ernst from the Left, for having come up with the proposal we're making in the resolution to be voted on tomorrow, to have a European search and rescue mission. Because what's clear, besides the ideological issue on this question, is that there is also a matter of European responsibility and subsidiarity. There is a humanitarian obligation to save lives at sea, an obligation that shouldn't separate us in this chamber, neither by ideology nor by subsidiarity. So let's move in that direction. Let's all unanimously vote together on this resolution to send out a clear signal to the Council about what we are calling for from this chamber. 2 days ago, the headless body of a 2-year-old boy was found on a beach in Tarragona in Spain, and the police think that he drowned trying to cross the Mediterranean. Let's not allow that to happen once again.
Would you, Señora Ruiz de Vesa, would you accept a blue card? Yes, okay. So, colleague Mr. Johansson, I'm sorry, Mr. Johansson.
I will speak Polish. Please take a chance. Mam krótkie pytanie dla pana.
I have a short question because you suggested something, a solution. So establishing a European mission, a European rescue mission. But right now the question is, how would that be financed in a situation where in the multi-annual financial framework we're already missing money, and Commissioner Hahn is suggesting that member states add 65 billion euros to the budget. So where would we find the money for your idea? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Please.
Muchas gracias al colega.
Thank you very much, dear colleague, for the question. We are proposing a European mechanism that will include member states and Frontex. So a joint mission that will ensure that we have the best possible coordination and cooperation. The mission may require some funding, as you have pointed out, and we will try to find solutions in the resolution and in the MFF, Multi-Annual Financial Framework. let's not forget that the member states themselves have the vessels that will be required in order to roll out the mission.
Muchas gracias. Next speaker, colleague Mr. Asmani, please.
Dank u, voorzitter. Ik zal het in het
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to be... 3 weeks ago, I was in Lampedusa, and I saw with my own eyes how many migrant boats are now arriving in Italy. This cynical model of human smuggling makes life even more dangerous. Many crossings are now being undertaken in self-manufactured metal boats that capsize easily, and they pose a hazard to the rescue crew. And the result, a tragically high number of drowning victims and an unsustainable influx of asylum seekers towards Italy, towards Europe. And this can't continue. It can't just be helped by more search and rescue, or, for example, on the right, you hear that, yes, we need more border fences, but that's not enough. Because you can have this rhetoric, but that won't prevent people from dying in the Mediterranean. If you really want to prevent this, you have to have agreements with the countries from which these people arrive, and these people who are leaving these countries. And that's why I ask the Commission to now put this at the highest political level, to negotiate with Tunisia, use all the resources we have to avoid that these dangerous journeys are even undertaken. That's the only way we can have a human migration policy.
Mrs. Strick, please.
Dear President, Council, Commissioner, the Pila shipwreck proved again how little value the lives of migrants and refugees hold, according to our member states. And let's admit that the approach on search and rescue, just like the funding of the criminal and smuggling Libyan Coast Guard, is about deterrence of arrivals and not by the actual saving lives. Stopping impunity is the only way. So, Commission, join our call for an independent investigation. Condemn Malta for letting people drown under their watch. And Greece and Italy for obstructing and punishing the life-saving work of NGOs. Give your guidelines against criminalization of humanitarian aid a true meaning. The Pact on Asylum and Migration doesn't cut this crisis. We need a pact on search and rescue, one that centers on solidarity among all member states, on accountability, on a uniform application of maritime law, and enhanced funding and support for saving lives at sea. It is the moral and legal duty of the EU to ensure a genuine, coordinated response. Now, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Mr. Roken. The floor is yours.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Now, I've heard this a number of times of today, the illusion of the left populists, this business model of the fighting the smugglers. So right now, we have high risk and low profit. That would be the new policy. Let's look at the past policies and how well that functioned. So the higher the risk, the higher the price, and the higher the profits. And so, of course, I'm in favor of search and rescue missions, but that doesn't automatically mean that we should be allowing these trips towards Europe, and we should support them. Rather, we should negotiate and work together with the countries of origin and have return of someone who has arrived illegally to Europe or who has not carried out an asylum procedure. If you reward these people with asylum procedures, then people were going to continue to come to Europe and die on the Mediterranean.
Very much. Next speaker, Mr. Madison. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, dear colleagues, dear Mrs. Johansson.
First of all, we have heard several times how we are very sorry for the victims in June when there was a shipwreck on the Mediterranean Sea. And of course, we are sorry for the human lives. There is no doubt about that. But we have to be also very, very clear that if you go to the sea with a very weak boat, then there's a very high risk that you will die. That's what will happen. I just have a question. In June 8, if I remember right, 4 very small kids were stabbed in the same country where we are just now in France. 2 of them were 2-year-old French kids. There was a 3-year-old British girl, and there was a 22-month-old small baby who were stabbed by the migrant from Syria. And of course, this guy from Syria could be like in Europe, only thanks for your migration policy. Have you ever contacted with those families who were worrying about their kids, and they were very, very near to death, only because that we have an open border policy and we're welcoming everyone, as Mrs. Johansson said? We need them. We need the people from the third world country without no education, without no background control, without any kind of control of their, like what they're going to do here, and we need them. I'm saying we don't need them. We don't need this kind of commissioners or European Commission who doesn't care about our own people.
Can you
That's
please
the fact. Thanks so much.
your intervention? Colleagues, I registered a blue card, but the speaker is on the speaking list, so you will have a possibility to speak when it's your turn. So we continue with the list of speakers. Mr. Arvanitis, the floor is yours.
Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a crime. I think we'd all agree on that, whatever approach we take. A crime that we know will happen again. So I'm sure that the majority here is upset about this, that we're sad, and of course we're going to hear some people who are indifferent to the tragedy. We are 2 worlds which are clashing, the world of humanity and that of inhumanity. Now, this situation, what happened in Pylos was tragic, and it requires us to move forward despite our disagreements. I'm not actually going to look at the causes. I think we need to take initiatives. But Mr. Weber and the far right may try very hard, but fences are not a deterrent. Legal and safe routes to asylum are ones we agree with, Commissioner. And you must also help to convince governments whose public statements devalue the proposal, because that's a problem for us. Mrs. Vosenberg, she can maybe ask if should we agree with the proposal. So there are questions for Frontex that demand answers to what happened in Pylos. How was the departure of this death ship actually allowed from ports in Egypt and Libya? Did no one see that vessel? It was detected by the European services, and they were aware of the danger of the situation. So why were no orders given for the immediate evacuation of the vessel and the rescue of the people? Who's responsible for this? Why were there no life jackets? Who is responsible?
Mr. Giarrusso, the floor is yours.
Presidente, colleghi.
President, colleagues, European citizens, or let's be honest, the Dublin Agreement represents a total failure. It imposes on countries of first entry that they alone face up to the epical phenomenon affecting the whole of Europe, and that's shameful. In Italy and Greece, thousands of migrants are arriving every day, and for search and rescue at sea we need means, people and funding from all European countries, because these people come to Europe, not to Italy. The Italian state has looked at this, and the European allies from the right have refused that agreement. So we're seeing these tragedies at sea, as in Cutro, as in Pylos. Thousands of children, women and men who die at sea in the indifference of so many people who seem incredibly to be aware of all of this. So let's get rid of Dublin, as van der Leyen promised. Let's share the responsibilities for search and rescue at sea so that we delete once and for all the shame of a Mediterranean which has been transformed into a huge maritime cemetery of totally guiltless citizens and human beings.
Mrs. Mussolini, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, we can't accept that when there is a debate on migration, serious issues about respect for human lives, there is always an attack condemnation from people who live in member states where they never see anybody arriving. They have no idea what it means to go and save lives at sea. So they have to attack Italy and Greece. If Italy wasn't there, there will be 100% people dead at sea. And this document, this resolution, serves nothing. They're just words, because the only true thing is that they should not go to sea, because they will die. They will die because there are these vessels, because as soon as they see a vessel, whether it's an NGO, whether it's a coast guard, they all throw themselves to one side, it capsizes, and they fall into the sea, and they can't swim. So this document is there for the NGOs, written by various people. We, the Italians, have brought in a law which once again imposes checks on disembarkations in safe ports, but the NGOs want to go where they choose. So once again in this resolution, we are talking about the nearest port. Nearest nothing. These has to be the ports decided on by member states where there will be the necessary assistance, food, medical assistance available for these people. So I think it's completely out of place. Commissioner, you were in Lampedusa, so thank you. Thank you first and foremost. The Italian Coast Guard is saving lives at sea, 24 hours a day. The mayor, Manino, and the deputy mayor. These people have to be thanked, President. And you're letting people from the left speak about this. I'm sorry, it's not right. There's a debate going on.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Mussolini, your time's expired. Will you accept a blue card? Will you accept a blue card? Mrs. Mussolini, will you accept a blue card? Blue card. Okay, so Mrs. Miranda, please, the floor is yours.
Mire, señora Mussolini.
Ms. Mussolini, listen, when you're sitting there in the backbenches, you get all worked up and you don't start shouting, making a fuss and banging on the tables. It's a lack of respect for this House, to be clear. Well, here on the left, we're here to defend values, human rights, defend migrants and people. I've been to Italy. I've been to spoken to the previous government and the current government and the vessels that weren't being rescued. So you can't give us lessons on democracy. Can you tell us whether that vessel actually got aid? Under Italian law, the law we're saying it's not exactly a law that's in line with European criteria.
Rispondo dicendo, cara.
Well, let me say exactly this. We want rules. NGOs cannot themselves select the ports because those ports have to have the necessary assistance for migrants. So you can't decide from your seat, nor can the NGO. It's the member states that have to decide this, who are responsible for helping migrants. That's the law, and law has to be respected.
Thank you. Next speaker, colleague Mr. Bartolo. The floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Well, let's make one thing clear. People are not lost at sea. When there's a shipwreck like that, people die. The numbers provided by the international organizations talking about people who've disappeared are numbers of people who have died that every now and again the sea washes up bodies. And Alessandra, of those bodies, I have received many, and I'm not ashamed to be from the left. It's been 30 years I have been helping these people, and in no way am I ashamed. This resolution, we're talking now about a resolution because that's what we're here to debate, tries to avoid that these numbers increase again. It wants to avoid other tragedies like Lampedusa, Cutro, Pylos, and stop other people leaving. This resolution calls on the EU to protect people's lives without sending them to third countries that don't respect human lives or without penalising NGOs. It calls on Europe to be itself, to avoid shipwrecks. That's what it's about. It puts each and every one of us in the face of our own responsibilities. And anyone voting against or abstaining, well, it will be up their consciences to respond for them. Thank you.
Mr. Dante, please.
Grazie, signora Presidente.
Thank you, President. Minister of State, Commissioner. Some principles are established in international treaties and underlie a very civilization. Saving lives at sea is one of those, and that principle is above every other assessment of migratory policies or any presumed national interest. Yes, we need to invest in cooperation with countries of origin. Yes, we need to step up in combating smugglers, but only if we have safe and secure migration channels will we have a valid alternative to these boats on which many people risk their lives. President, I would also like to stress how contradictory the assessment of many European leaders is, including the Italian Prime Minister, who see the panacea in protection of external borders. When there is no land but the sea, protecting borders means abandoning men, women and children off our coasts. And from that to the rescue missions, even in line with the laws, etc., it's a small step, a step which will undermine the entire progress made by our civilization.
Next speaker, colleague, Monsieur Carême. Excusez-moi.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, President. For each disaster, a debate, and ever more shame, the European Union is now surrounded by a maritime cemetery. We're seeing the mafia of Libya being funded, and in 2023 shows very clearly what the consequences are in terms of the deaths. 2nd January, humanitarian action stopped. 26th of February, Calabrian deaths. 25th of March, Ocean Vikings fired at. 27th of April, Commissioner Johansson asks Tunisia to guard our borders for 150 million. 24th of May, 500 people in distress in Maltese waters sent to Libya. 2nd of June, humanitarian vessels stopped in their action. 8th of June, the solidarity mechanism is stopped for search rescue at sea. 14th of June, more than 600 people die in Greece. 21st, 2nd, and 20th of June, 4 drownings in Italy, Spain and Tunisia. 7th of July, more firing at Ocean Viking. On the 12th of July in Strasbourg, we're seeing more. We're asking for an end to these killings.
Señor Bouchardet Villalba.
Gracias, Presidente, Comisarias.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. In the past 3 months, we've seen 441 deaths. And let's not talk about the numbers for the year before that. It's a tragedy. And who's behind this? The mafias that are cooperating within Africa. And secondly, political leaders who are not, and the NGOs that are acting as complices in this. And the poll for massive migration, the only solution to really stop these mafias is to really fight them. They say, give me a few thousand euros, there's going to be someone who's going to pay for your flat, schooling and everything free of charge when you arrive. We say to these people, don't pay a cent, don't pay €1, because the only thing that will happen is that you'll send back to your country. Let's stop this sham. Now, we need to set up centres for the analysis. Many of these countries are receiving thousands and millions. We've seen trouble in France with public order. And so let us not fool ourselves. Let's focus on what matters, fighting crime.
Yes, next speaker, colleague Mr. Van den Driessen. The floor is yours.
Voorzitter, collega's, asielrecht.
Colleagues, the right to asylum is being misused as a migration channel. Millions are coming to Europe illegally, and once they arrive, then they all have the right to enjoy all kinds of social advantages without making a contribution. And that's why they are willing to risk the dangerous journey. And that is the model of the smugglers. And because they're depending on our naivete and our laziness and the fact that we're not going to defend our external borders, we need a different policy. We have to stop with the policy of the open external border. And we have to the policy of anyone who comes illegally is sent back. And only in that fashion can we undermine the business model of the human smugglers. We have to do as Australia. We have to have a return policy rather than a welcome policy. We have to have a pushback policy. That's the only humane response.
Thank you. Next speaker, colleague Mrs. Björk. The floor is yours.
It's not just a tragedy. It's a crime that's been committed when the Greek Coast Guard did not assist the ship that sank with hundreds of people who died. And instead of trying to prevent Frontex and the EU and the National Coast Guard made themselves guilty of contributing to the death. And countries are continuing their pushbacks, and the death continues. This is racist, it's inhumane, and it's illegal. Those countries who are doing the countries who are doing pushbacks, and they don't, you have to have the rescue operations. You can't criminalize NGOs who are rescuing people. You have to create safe channels of migration. This is all possible. We just need the political courage to do so.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Bay, s'il vous plaît.
Chers collègues, 8,4 millions de migrants.
8.4 million migrants have asked asylum in the European Union since 2001. That's the size of Austria, and they will continue to arrive by the million for as long as you continue to welcome them and spread them across Europe. And it's your fault if a few die at sea because of your laxist pews, your humanitarianism, and you want to organise their welcome, set up taxi services and play the game of mafias and traffickers who are driving this illegal trade. These are not refugees. They're not fleeing persecution or war. They are coming to take benefits, our generosity, and bringing poverty, crime quite often, and sometimes even terrorism. We have to make a choice, either your moralizing or our way of life. And we've seen the riots in France. We've seen what's happened in terms of the safety of our children. You have your policy. I have made my choice, and history will be the judge of these decisions.
Speaker, colleague Mrs. Vosenberg-Vrionivi. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, once again, we are discussing the borders. That's where we need a European holistic approach. Commissioner, we think it's unacceptable that you're pointing the finger of a country of first acceptance without looking at the data, condemning Greece and saying it's responsible for the lack of human lives with no testimony or the data. Do you want to hear the data? Men and women in the Hellenic Coast Guard are heroes, colleagues, heroes. Only over the last 4 years, 2019 to 2023, they've saved 40,000 human beings in the sea from about 1,300 cases, and 270 traffickers have been arrested from various different organisations. That's the role of Greece and every single one of us. No one can claim that they're more humanistic than others. We all are. But there's a problem. We have to find a solution. How can we find a solution if we can't decide that, as you yourself said, Commissioner, that the main problem is that the traffickers themselves, that they are using these desperate people and people who can't save themselves, but we need a very clear search and rescue mission together in cooperation with Frontex and in line with international law, because otherwise everyone with a different voice who speaks out against the countries of first acceptance, I'm sorry, you are not helping solve this problem. Thank you.
Very much. Next speaker, colleague Madame Guillaume, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. The joint resolution, as tabled by 5 political groups, is a very comprehensive one, and I hope it shows the real risks of crossing the Mediterranean and the consequences of taking this deadly route. And I hope it's not just a tactic within certain groups to try and torpedo a text that calls for European rescue missions. The mission is something that we've been asking for years now, and we have strong arguments to back this, and that's why I call on the European Commission to take its responsibility. And the argument to say that only national competence is at stake here will not resolve the problem. We need this mission, but we must go even further, because 27,000 people have lost their lives since 2014 on this deadly route. We cannot lose any more time. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Next speaker, colleague Madame Interveld, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Commissioner, Mr. Minister. Let's compare here. The billionaire on board the shipwreck Titan was a Pakistani citizen and holder of a Maltese golden passport. 209 Pakistani people on board the Adriana had no golden passport, indeed, no legal pathways. Yes, people smuggling is a despicable crime that must be fought, but don't try and distract and shift the blame, because once a boat is out on the sea and in trouble, as the Commissioner said, our first duty is to save lives. Full stop. There are no buts. I hear people say here, yes, we have to save lives, but. There's no but. We save lives. Now, in the case of the Pylos shipwreck, there are very strong indications that 600 deaths might have been prevented. An independent international investigation is essential to make sure there is no cover-up. Finally, we urgently need a common EU search and rescue capacity without further delay or excuses. And as the Commissioner said very, very well, let our action be the monument to the victims of Pylos. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, colleague Mr. Boselager. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, I just want to go back to what actually happened, which is that almost 600 people died. And I think we hear a lot of, talking about asylum, about smuggling and so on, but we should really picture what that means. I mean, here there are around 700 people if the room is full. That would mean that almost like 600 of them would die. I think it's important to picture that. This is a couple of moments of people actually drowning in the bottom of a boat. And then we talk about search and rescue, and I ask myself, why do we actually call it search and rescue? I mean, Eric, you described it quite well. They were first ignored in this boat, and then they were not rescued, but they were towed away, which is why the boat very likely capsized. So we shouldn't call this search and rescue. We should call this something like ignore and risk their lives. So, Kostas, you said that's a crime. Yes, it's a crime, and the crime is not that we're not following up with smugglers. The crime is not that we're not doing enough to save these lives, that we are stopping NGOs from going there. And yes, that is an Italian problem as well as it is a Greek problem. So I really believe we need the EU-led state EU search and rescue mission. We need to monitor what happened, and we shouldn't forget the lives of these people that are lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Monsieur Lacapelle, s'il vous plaît.
Madame le Président,
Madam President, dear colleagues, today's debate talks about a need to go and find migrants at sea on the eve of the migration pact. Just shows the blindness of amongst this Parliament with regard to the situation. When vessels are in distress, there's not an obligation to go and rescue them or take them to Europe, for that matter, because we know that NGOs are connecting illegal migrant vessels and bringing them to Europe. This is the policy pursued by those who want to promote migration because of their political ideology and who want Europe to become a welcome centre for migrants. And let me say that patriots in Europe are standing up against it and don't want to be wiped out. And at the next election, European election, they will hold you to account.
Mr. Uhrik, please.
Tvrdíte, že Európa musí posilniť záchranné operácie na mori.
Colleagues, you say that we need to beef up our safe search and rescue missions because of the many tragedies with migrants. But the fact that illegal migration is a tragedy in Europe, well, you're shutting your eyes to that. Let me say to you that here in Europe, what we need is law enforcement and military on our borders to ensure that migrants stop coming to Europe. So why is it that just anyone can cross borders? Who amongst you will just leave your front door open when you leave your house? Would you sleep soundly with your door wide open? No. You have to stop these gangs, you have to stop the traffickers and the taxi services that are being organised for illegal migrants. Otherwise, we'll just find ourselves in the same situation that we're seeing in French cities that are burning.
Thank you, dear President. Colleagues, tragic scenes from the Mediterranean that we have been witnessing remind us once again that by not having a complete system when it comes to migration and asylum, Europe, in a great part, is the victim of the will of traffickers who are gambling with the lives of people. A recent visit to Lampedusa from colleagues from the Committee of Civil Liberties has shown that this island is a symbol of the dysfunctional policy of migration of the European Union. If we want to avoid further tragedy and further migrational pressure that is occurring for Europe and this island, we have to be brave without emotional blackmailing, and Europe definitely has a duty of solidarity toward those who are in danger. But we cannot indirectly support different organized networks of traffickers who are making profits by selling very dangerous and lethal arrangements for coming to Europe. We have to support Frontex with their challenges, and we have to support the member states that are under the highest pressure. We need a European agreement on the system of migration and asylum. Thank you.
Next speaker, colleague Mr. Edgerer, and I would like to announce that we will now close the list of the HDI. Thank you.
Deployed, millions spent, all news channels stopped their regular broadcasting and focused on the search and rescue of 5 very rich people who went missing in a submarine to have a look at the Titanic. It was good that everyone did their utmost to try and bring them to safety. But let us not forget that there are countless others, people fleeing persecution, yes, and even hunger, who deserve the same level of urgency and compassion. Every life is precious, and we must extend the same efforts and do everything possible to rescue everyone at sea. Yes, European challenges require European solutions, yet we cannot have European solutions without European solidarity among member states, and this can only happen and work with real mandatory relocation. Only then can we ensure that no one is left behind, that every life, regardless of their money, regardless of their circumstances, is afforded the dignity and protection that it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, colleague Mr. Kirchhoff.
Thank you very much, President. The shipwreck that took place off the coast of Pylos calls upon all of us to think carefully. We need to ensure that the European Union provides protection for refugees and migrants, and we also have to look at the responsibility of political parties which instrumentalize the situation. In Greece, the Prime Minister has drawn his own conclusions. No responsibility can be attributed to the Greek Coast Guard. He even talked about the bad intentions of people who have a negative approach. Well, we have to note the issues that there have been with telephone listening in and the problems faced by my colleague Mr. Androulakis. We need an independent inquiry which I can predict will not be accepted by the Greek authorities. The level of hypocrisy of those in power is similar to the sort of thing that we saw to the attitude of the Brexiters towards migrants in the UK, trying to draw profit from a problem that they're supposed to be resolving.
Do you think that brothers, sisters, parents, children would board a vessel to cross the Mediterranean, thinking everything will be fine, that they're not afraid and don't think that won't be dangerous, that they're guided by the hope of finding a better life here than the one they're left behind? Let's think about the people in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic and the Channel. Building walls are also political choices. How many broken families and lost lives do we have to count? How much press conference covering? How much hypocrisy do we have to tolerate? We can put an end to these deaths as politicians to make sure that we can have a constructive management of migration, to have safe legal ways of entry, to decide that solidarity, reception, humanity, dignity are our common values, decide today to have a European safe search and rescue mission and save people. Our civilization will be judged by these acts.
Mr. Belinsky, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to speak as a representative of a political group that is against migration, so demonized by you. Every human has the right to be saved, but the issue is the political discussion that we're having. Our approach is different. Often we talk about whether migrants are being taken towards Europe, 500 kilometers, or whether they are taken a few kilometers back towards North Africa. And this is the discussion that we have to have. And since 2015, we have seen millions of people coming to Europe. This is a huge number of people, bigger than the population of Ireland. And in my view, if we look at what's happening in France, we can only have we have to do one thing. We need to help people in their regions. We need to ensure people are helped on the ground so we do not need to bring all of these people to Europe. This is the right way so that we do not need to deal with this debate any longer. Thank you.
Next speaker, Mrs. Houtedal. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. We still have no final death toll from the disaster of the fishing boats that sank off the coast of Greece last month. Every single loss of life is a tragedy. And of course, we must demand that member states carry out rescue efforts in their own waters. But this is only a solution for the symptoms of a non-functioning migration policy. Part of the long-term solution is to crush the criminal human networks at the routes that, for instance, go to Middle East and North Africa. This requires cooperation with third countries by requiring these countries to put trafficking networks in prison and to increase their control at the border in order to stop migrants. This should be a prerequisite to receive any financial aid from EU or our member states. We must also remove the pull factors that cause a large number of economic migrants to travel to Europe. Screening processes are needed at the external border, and we need a credible system that enables those that have no need for asylum to return. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, colleague, Señor Moreno Sanchez. Por favor.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. State Secretary, welcome to the European Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, every year we repeat this debate in this Parliament, and day after day the tragedies are being repeated in the Mediterranean. And if we look at what's happened in the past 10 years, we have more than 600 people who disappeared in the last shipwreck. And what we need to do is put an end to these sea cemeteries. And we've saved many lives in recent years, especially thanks to operations such as Sophia and Mare Nostrum. But once again, we need to have human corridors, and we also need to change the mandate of Frontex so they have the right funds, adequate funds, and in which member states and Frontex play their role to the max. What's at stake here is human dignity and people's lives, but it's also the dignity of European institutions. And we are counting on the Spanish Presidency to move forward on this. Thank you.
Next speaker, colleague, Mr. Andrews, please.
Thank you, Madam President, Commissioner and colleagues. Some of this debate has been about the secondary consequences of saving lives at sea, that it will encourage and somehow support the business model of human trafficking. But certain things are so intrinsically right, like saving lives at sea, that secondary consequences should be disregarded. The consequences of not having EU-led search and rescue is increased numbers of deaths and torture in captivity in detention centres in Libya. These are secondary consequences that we should have regard to. And this is why I requested this resolution, along with colleagues in the S&D, the Greens and the Left. The vote in 2019 is a stain on the record of this House. And I would like to encourage all colleagues to do the right thing and correct the record of this House. As long as we continue to allow this senseless loss of life, we cannot claim to be a union of values. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, colleague, Mrs. Stavru. The floor is yours.
Colleagues, when the Cypriot Republic sent an SOS, the scale of the problem became evident. We received 50% of refugees landing in Europe. We're on the front line. and there are these flows in other countries, but for the size of our country, it's huge. Cyprus is a stable member state of the European Union with the highest deployment in terms of population. And what is the point of borders if they can't be protected? If thousands or millions of illegal refugees come to our countries, refugees often come from Turkey. They use the proximity to our countries and they use the green line to pursue their political purposes. It's essential that we take a courageous approach to this problem because the flow of refugees is getting bigger. To protect the democratic character of our countries, the speaker is interrupted.
Proceed with the next speaker, colleague. Thank you. Next colleague, Mr. Bielowski, please.
Danke, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you very much, President. 1 month ago, almost 700 people drowned off the coast of Greece. And this is not one sad case, this is one of many. And many more will take place if we do not take action. More than 27,000 people have lost their lives when fleeing Europe via the Mediterranean. What we need to do is end something which we should have done long ago. And the first thing to do is vote in favour of this resolution, which will put an end to these deaths. We need to have acknowledgement of rescue operations. NGOs are doing most of our political work. People have the right to asylum, they have the right to flee hunger and war, and they need to do so in a framework where we are not on the side of the privileged. We need to go in line with our commitments so that it's not just an empty gesture. We need to have proper international solidarity.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, colleague, Mrs. Santos. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam President. In 2019, we had a debate in this plenary which was absolutely identical to today's. It was absolutely identical. Once again, it was triggered by another tragedy in the Mediterranean. Since then, 10,000 more lives have been lost. And the only question that we should be asking ourselves here, colleagues, is until when? Until when will rich, developed countries come together and commit to protecting human rights? Will they continue to close their eyes to this tragedy, continue to fail to give a satisfactory response to this situation? How long will we go on without search and rescue in the Mediterranean that is properly coordinated between the different countries in Frontex? Until when are we going to continue to criminalize NGOs, which in many cases are the only response that can provide search and rescue in the Mediterranean, because there is a lack of presence on the ground from the member states? Colleagues, we have to put an end to this shame, because what we're talking about here brings shame upon all of us.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, let me, on behalf of all of us, warmly welcome in the diplomatic gallery a delegation of parliamentarians from Japan who are here for the 41st EU-Japan Interparliamentary Meeting. Very well welcome. Thank you very much. Next speaker, Vice President Picerno, please.
Sì, grazie, signora.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Commissioner, colleagues. The illusion that some governments have that they can seal the borders of Europe ultimately betray the founding values of European integration. Europe must remain a safe harbour for all who are escaping from war and violence and abuse. With this spirit, with the same spirit that we received so many Ukrainian refugees. That's the same spirit with which we should look to the Mediterranean. If you look at Europe from Kiev, it's not different to looking at Europe from a trawler in the middle of the Mediterranean. Both look to us as a safe harbour. So what can we do against the deaths at sea, the terrifying choices that the right would like to take? We would prefer to work for a mission of search and rescue at sea, a European Mare Nostrum that can ensure that saving lives comes back to being the centre of our migratory policy. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you very much, colleagues. I have 3 speakers on my HDI list, and I'll start with Mr. Lopez Aguilar. Por favor.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Thank you very much, President, and Spanish Presidency and Commissioner Johansson. In 2019, I had the honour of being rapporteur on a resolution from the European Parliament which demanded a search and rescue framework in Europe. And 4 years later, we have seen thousands more deaths, people who have died in shipwrecks and tragedies, not only on the Mediterranean route, but also in the Atlantic, on the route towards the Canary Islands. European sea and search and rescue would give coast guards and member states, would help member states that would, together with Frontex, they could coordinate search and rescue operations, but it would also help them to land at safe ports, and it would help identify, and it would give people protection once they actually landed. And this is why we need that approach. We need to have legal routes, safe landings, safe disembarkations, so that the coast guards and member states will not be abandoned, because this has become a terrible situation. We're seeing it 4 years later, even after we debated this in the European Parliament then. Thank you.
Gracias. Next speaker, colleague Mr. Kelleher. The floor is yours.
The 2019 vote in this Parliament is a stain on us all, and I was complicit in that stain because I was not present to vote on that day. Since then, thousands of more people have died in the Mediterranean. How much longer must we exempt ourselves from our responsibilities to ensure that we have the basics of search and rescue available to people who are drowning in the Mediterranean? Just because we fail to deal with the human traffickers and the camps in North Africa and elsewhere, and the flow of people across into Europe, just because we fail to deal with that, does not mean that we should fail in a human being's hour of need when they are gasping for air as they drown just off the beaches where we lie sunbathing during the summer. It is shameful, and the European Union and this Parliament must ensure that search and rescue is at its best across the entire Mediterranean to ensure that we can throw a life-buoy to a human being who is drowning, as I say, just yards from where we lie in beaches during the summer.
Thank you very much. Last speaker on my list, Señor Solé, por favor.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you very much, President. Yesterday, something terrible happened in the Aroa beach in Catalonia. The body of a child, age 2 or 3, was found, was at advanced stage of decomposition, and the police are working on various hypotheses. One of them is that this is a victim of a shipwreck, a ship full of migrants. This is a very simple question, not emotional blackmail. Do we not have the means and technical means and capacity to coordinate and save lives and prevent these tragedies? Do we not have the means to comply with international law? The Mediterranean is the most lethal sea, but it's not the biggest. Nobody should be dying in the Mediterranean. We need to help the countries of origin. Of course, we need to do that. But once people are at sea, we need to prevent tragedies. We need to save lives, and we need to put all of our political will into this and all resources we have to do so. We've had enough of excuses.
Yes, thank you very much, colleagues. And now I would like to give the floor again to Commissioner Johansson for her comments and final remarks. Madam Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Thank you all for this very important debate. I think problems start when you no longer think of people as human beings. The people in the Adriana and other vessels are human beings. They are men, women, children, with hopes and dreams, with families and friends. Many of you made this point today. The Adriana wasn't the first shipwreck, and we can't promise it will be the last. But we will never ever think that this is acceptable. We must do what we can to prevent further tragedies, and I agree with many of you that make the strong call for legal pathways here today. It just doesn't make sense when we see member states and companies in need of skilled labour, and at the same time people are so desperate they put their lives in a smuggler's hand. There had got to be a better way, and there is a better way. We must provide safe routes to Europe by building more and better legal pathways to the European Union. And to prevent dangerous journeys, it's necessary to fight the smugglers more effectively. The smugglers who do not see their victims as human beings, but as cargo, a source of profit. The smugglers of the Adriana reportedly charged between $4,000 and $5,000 each, a total of nearly $4 million. Smugglers are organised criminals, and we must treat them as such. Our first obligation is always to save lives at sea. Member state vessels, private ships, NGOs, boats carry out this duty every day. And although a national competence, the EU must do everything in its power to support search and rescue. Frontex planes and ships support search and rescue operation. And as Executive Director Hans Leitens told the Libe Committee last week, this year alone, Frontex has helped to save 20,000 lives. And the Commission is working with Member States to improve coordination, notably in the contact group on search and rescue. We will continue this work, step it up, and engage actively with Member States for them to take necessary actions. Because Member States should step up on search and rescue. It's their core responsibility, and they must take it. We will continue to support them to the maximum of our capacity and ability. Thank you again for this important debate.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. Colleagues, we are still continuing with the debate, and I have a pleasure to invite to the floor Minister Navarro on behalf of the Spanish Presidency. Por favor.
Señora Presidenta. Thank you very much, Madam President. Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, thank you very much for this debate. It's been a clear proof of how complex migration issues are, and we have taken note of all of your points and your comments. It's clear that in the Mediterranean, the situation in the Mediterranean needs to be dealt with in a timely manner in line with international maritime law. As I highlighted in my initial presentation, the Presidency is committed to an integrated approach to migration. We'll continue to work on all of the activities that I mentioned, including negotiations that are ongoing on legislative proposals on the Migration Pact. There'll be negotiations in Council and between Council and Parliament. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. So the debate is closed. We have received 3 motions for resolutions to wind up this debate, and the vote will be held tomorrow. And the sitting is suspended for 2 minutes. We will resume at 12 with the votes. Thank you.